The lone survivor lay among the dead, her fate hanging by a thread as thin as the evening mist. Sir Elias of Thornvale rode slowly across the rutted path, his weathered cloak pulled tight against the autumn chill. He always rode with caution now these days. There had been a time when he spurred his mount with urgency, when the weight of knighthood and duty propelled him forward. But those days had faded like summer into the cold embrace of winter, leaving only the steady rhythm of hoofbeats and breath beneath the darkening sky. His mare Thistle slowed before he could pull the reins, her ears flattening against her head, nostrils flaring at some scent Elias could not yet detect. He dismounted in one fluid motion, boots sinking into the mud of the forest path. His hand moved to rest upon the hilt of his sword, not drawing it, but ready. The air smelled wrong, too still, too sweet with iron. Elias moved forward slowly, each step measured, as he brushed past the gnarled oaks that lined the way. And then he saw it. The merchant caravan lay in ruins. Splintered wagon wheels jutted from the earth like broken bones, canvas coverings ripped and fluttering in the weak breeze. Bodies scattered in the careless arrangement that only death could design, their fine garments stained black in the fading light. Elias did not need to count the dead. He had seen enough battlefields to know what manner of men had done this. Not common brigands who killed for coin, but something worse, the kind who rode not for gold, but because the screaming filled something hollow within them. He moved without hurry, but with practiced care, his steps quiet though the dead required no stealth. A merchant with rings still on his fingers, proof this was no common robbery, a guard fallen across his broken pike, having died defending his charge. The scent of char and cooling blood hung in the air like incense from a dark ritual. Elias knelt, not to pray, he'd stopped believing words could undo such things, but to listen. And it was then, tucked beneath the shadow of an overturned cart, that he heard it. The faintest sound, a breath that was almost not a breath. A woman, still alive. She lay curled beneath a cloak lined with silver fox fur, her face streaked with ash and blood, hair spread about her like dark water. Her hand clutched at nothing, fingers twitching as if dreaming or dying. He bent down, let his hand hover near her face and felt it, a whisper of warmth, fragile as a moth's wing. She was no common traveller. Her gown, though torn, showed threads of gold at the hem. A single glove remained on her right hand, its embroidery speaking of nobility and distant courts. The other hand lay bare, knuckles scraped raw. Elias didn't speak. There was no need. Instead, he slipped his arms beneath her, surprised by how little she weighed, as though death had already claimed most of her. Her head fell against his chest, and for a moment he thought she might open her eyes. But they remained closed. Her life hanging by threads as thin as those that once adorned her gown. Sir Elias's stone cottage stood against the flank of a wooded hill, its thatched roof weathered by seasons of rain and sun. A single wisp of smoke curled from the chimney, rising into the twilight sky like a silent prayer. He had built it himself 3 winters past, after the pestilence had taken Marguerite, each stone laid with purpose, as if the weight of them might anchor him to the world of the living. Thistle whickered softly as Elias dismounted, the unconscious woman still cradled in his arms. The mare had carried them both without complaint, though the journey had been slow and careful across the rutted forest paths. The woman had not stirred once during their journey, her breathing shallow and uneven against his chest. "Easy now," he murmured, though whether to the horse or the woman he could not say. Inside, the cottage was spare but orderly. A hearth dominated one wall, its fire burning low but steady. A wooden table with a single chair, a narrow bed covered with woolen blankets, shelves lined with dried herbs and a few battered scrolls. Everything in its place, as Marguerite had once kept it. He laid the woman gently upon his bed, removing her torn cloak with careful hands. In the firelight, her injuries seemed both better and worse. No mortal wounds, but a mosaic of cuts and bruises that spoke of violence endured. A thin silver chain around her neck held a small pendant, its crest worn smooth by handling. Elias worked methodically, as he had done for wounded men on distant battlefields. He cleaned her cuts with water warmed at the hearth, bound her bruised ribs with strips of linen, and carefully worked salve into the abrasions on her hands. The noble glove he set aside, its embroidered surface incongruous against the rough-hewn table. When he had done all he could, he sat beside the hearth, watching the rise and fall of her chest beneath the blankets. Outside, an owl called into the night, its cry echoing across the silent forest. On the shelf above the hearth stood a small carved figure, a woman with flowing hair, the wood polished smooth by years of handling. Marguerite, as she had been before. The sickness took her color, her voice, and finally her breath. Elias's eyes moved between the figure and the stranger in his bed, guilt and duty warring in his chest. "I know not what to do with you," he said softly to the unconscious woman, "but I could not leave you to the wolves and ravens." The fire crackled in response, casting long shadows across the stone floor. Elias leaned back in his chair, prepared for a night of vigil. His sword rested against the wall within arm's reach, not because he feared the woman, but because he feared what might still pursue her. The night settled around them like a cloak, and Elias kept watch, caught between memories of the dead and duty to the living. Dawn crept through the single window of the cottage, painting pale light across the stone floor. Sir Elias had not slept, his vigil marked by the dying and rekindling of the hearth fire throughout the night. He was adding kindling to the flames when he heard it, a change in the rhythm of breathing from the bed, a soft rustle of linen. The woman's eyes opened halfway, then fully wide with confusion. She tried to sit up, wincing as pain found her. "Be still," Elias said, his voice low and even, the tone he once used to calm skittish war-horses. "Your wounds need time." Her gaze darted around the small cottage, the hearth, the shelves of dried herbs, the wooden figure of Marguerite, before settling on Elias himself. Her eyes were the color of rain-washed slate, and they held nothing of trust. "Where?" she began, her voice cracking from disuse. Elias brought her a wooden cup filled with water. She took it with both hands, one still bearing the embroidered glove, now stained with dried blood. She drank cautiously, as if suspecting poison. "You're safe," he said, stepping back to give her space. "I found you among the dead on the eastern road." A shadow crossed her face, memory returning in cruel fragments. "The others. None survived but you." She closed her eyes briefly, though whether in grief or calculation, Elias could not tell. When she looked at him again, something had hardened behind her gaze. "You have my gratitude, sir," she said, her voice gaining strength. The words were common enough, but the manner of their delivery, precise, measured, marked her as one accustomed to formal speech. "Sir Elias of Thornvale," he offered, though he had not used his title in years. She nodded, but volunteered nothing in return. "And you are?" he asked after the silence had stretched between them. Her fingers tightened around the cup. "No one of consequence?" That was a lie. Her bearing, her speech, the fine weave of what remained of her garments all spoke otherwise. But Elias did not press. Everyone had their reasons for silence. "You need rest," he said instead, moving toward the door. "There's bread when you hunger. Why did you bring me here?" The question followed him, sharp and sudden. Elias paused, his hand on the door latch. "Would you rather I had left you?" "I rather wonder why you did not." He considered her, this stranger, in his bed, wounded in body, but clearly not in spirit. "Perhaps," he said finally, "I have seen enough death. She watched him with those rain-slate eyes, measuring his words against some hidden standard. "As have I," she said quietly, "though it seems not enough to join it yet." 3 days passed before she could stand without aid. Elias found her at dawn on the 4th day, gripping the edge of the table, determination etched into the lines of her face. She wore a simple linen shirt and woolen breeches he had provided, clothes that had once belonged to Marguerite, though he did not tell her this. "You should not be standing yet," he said, setting down the kindling he had gathered. "I am not accustomed to idleness." Her voice was stronger now, though pain still shadowed her eyes. She took a step, faltered, but caught herself before he could move to assist her. "Pride will not mend broken bones faster," Elias observed, but made no move to stop her. "Nor will lying abed until I forget how to walk." She took another step, steadier this time. They settled into a rhythm of sorts in the days that followed. Elias hunted and tended his small garden, while she slowly regained her strength. He noticed how she watched him work, not with confusion, but with careful study, like a scholar observing unfamiliar customs. When she first attempted to assist with preparing vegetables for their evening meal, he saw how she held the knife, awkwardly, unused to such labor, yet too proud to admit it. "Like this," he demonstrated, his calloused hands guiding the blade in efficient strokes. "The knife does the work if you let it." She nodded, eyes following his movements with unexpected humility. "I had servants before." "I gathered as much," he replied, but did not press further. On the 7th day she stood at the open doorway, gazing at the forest beyond. Mist clung to the pines, and birdsong filtered through the cool morning air. "I need to see the sky," she said quietly. "To know the world still turns." "It does," he replied, "whether we ask it to or not." She stepped outside, her hand braced against the doorframe. Elias followed, watching her face as she took in the small clearing he called home. The modest garden, the woodpile, the path leading into the forest. "I should tell you my name," she said finally, still looking toward the trees. "You have earned that much truth at least." Elias waited, offering neither encouragement nor discouragement. "I am called Evelyn," she said. The way she said it, carefully, as if selecting a single thread from a tapestry, told him it was true, but incomplete. "Evelyn," he repeated, testing the shape of it. She turned to him then, something softer in her gaze. "Did you bury them? The others on the road?" "I marked them as best I could. The ravens had come before I could return." She nodded once, her throat working around words unsaid. Then, surprisingly, "I can mend your cloak. I noticed it's torn at the shoulder." A small offering, like a dove released from clenched hands. "Tomorrow," he said. "Your hands need one more day of healing." She accepted this with unexpected grace, and together they walked back inside, where the morning's bread waited. The village of Thornwick lay a half-day's ride from Elias's cottage, a cluster of thatched roofs and muddy lanes huddled beneath the shadow of the local lord's manor. Elias rarely ventured there, preferring solitude to the curious glances of villagers who whispered of the knight who had abandoned his oath after his lady's death. Today he had come for salt and iron nails. Nothing more. Yet as he passed the workshop of Aldous the craftsman, something caught his eye. A lute hanging from a peg on the wall, its curved body gleaming with polished wood, strings taut like waiting whispers. Elias had seen how Evelyn's fingers moved, sometimes when she sat by the fire, tapping rhythms on her knee as if playing some invisible instrument. He had noticed the way her head tilted when birds sang in the morning, how she hummed under her breath when she thought he couldn't hear. "How much for the lute?" he asked, surprising himself. Aldous named a price thrice what Elias had brought. Yet before the sun reached midday, the instrument was secured to Thistle's saddle, purchased with the promise of a fortnight's hunting bounty. The return journey seemed longer than usual, the lute a strange presence at his side. What had possessed him to make such a frivolous purchase? A knight with no manor, a hermit with barely enough to survive the winter, buying a nobleman's instrument for a woman whose real name he did not know. When he reached the cottage, Evelyn was tending the fire, her movements more fluid now that her wounds had begun to heal. She looked up as he entered, her greeting dying on her lips as she saw what he carried. "What is that?" she asked, though her eyes told him she knew precisely what it was. Elias held out the lute awkwardly, like an offering he wasn't sure would be accepted. "I thought perhaps your hands seemed to miss it." She took the instrument with trembling fingers, cradling it as one might hold a lost child suddenly found. For a long moment she said nothing, her face a study in warring emotions. "How did you know?" she finally whispered. Elias shrugged, uncomfortable with her intensity. "I watched your hands." Evelyn sat by the hearth, positioning the lute in her lap with practiced ease. Her fingers hovered over the strings, hesitant, as if afraid they might have forgotten their purpose. Then she began to play. The melody that filled the small cottage was not the simple tune of village celebrations, but something more complex, layered with emotion that needed no words. A courtly song, meant for marble halls and velvet cushions, now echoing against stone walls and wooden beams. Elias stood motionless, transfixed. In that moment, Evelyn was transformed, not a wounded refugee in borrowed clothes, but something regal, untouchable. When she finally looked up, tears glistened in her eyes. "Thank you," she said simply. "You have given me back a piece of myself. I thought lost." The flower arrived with Elias's next journey to the village, a small sack traded for 3 rabbits and a brace of quail. Evelyn regarded it with determination in her eyes, as if facing a worthy opponent across a battlefield. "I would make bread," she announced, the lute resting against the wall behind her. 2 weeks of playing had calloused her fingertips anew, though differently than Elias's hands, weathered by sword and plough. He watched her measure water into the wooden bowl, her movements precise but uncertain. She had been observing his simple cookery with careful attention, though he'd noticed how she studied the proportions rather than the techniques themselves. "You've not done this before," he said, not a question. She looked up, a smudge of flour across her cheek. "Is it so obvious?" "And no music, not dough." He stepped beside her, demonstrating how to knead with the heels of his palms. "Like this. The bread remembers how you touch it." She nodded, imitating his movements with quiet concentration. "In my father's house, there were servants for such tasks. And in mine, there was only myself and Marguerite," he replied. The name of his dead wife still strange on his tongue after so long unspoken. They worked side by side, the cottage filling with the earthy scent of rising dough. Outside, clouds gathered on the horizon, dark and brooding with promised rain. The storm broke as they placed the loaf in the small clay oven beside the hearth. Rain lashed against the shutters, and wind moaned through the trees beyond. A crack of thunder shook the cottage walls. Evelyn flinched, her hand flying to her throat, where the silver chain still hung beneath her shirt. Her eyes widened, seeing not the cottage but something else, men on horses perhaps, or blades catching firelight. "Evelyn," Elias said quietly, not touching her but standing close enough that she might feel his presence. "You're here, by the hearth." She drew a shaking breath, eyes slowly focusing on him again. "It was raining," she whispered, "when they came." He nodded once, offering neither pity nor questions, only understanding. "Come, the bread needs watching." She settled beside the hearth, her shoulder nearly touching his, both of them staring into the flames as if reading futures there. The storm raged outside, but inside the small cottage held steady. When the bread emerged, imperfect, slightly burned at one edge, she broke it carefully and offered him the first piece. "It's good," he said after tasting it, the lie gentle enough to pass unnoticed. It's terrible, she countered, a smile tugging at her mouth, but perhaps the next will be better. That night, as rain drummed against the thatch, she played the lute again, softer this time. Elias listened, whittling a small piece of wood by the fire, neither of them needing to fill the silence with words. The market day in Thornwick brought merchants from neighbouring villages, their carts and tents transforming the muddy square into a maze of commerce. Evelyn had insisted on accompanying Elias, her strength recovered enough for the journey. In truth, she hungered for more than the cottage walls after weeks of convalescence. "I'll fetch the salt," she offered, pulling the hood of her borrowed cloak forward. The garment, once Marguerite's, was plain enough to avoid notice, or so she believed. The village store smelled of tallow candles and dried herbs, its shelves crowded with goods from distant towns. Evelyn moved carefully through the narrow aisles, savouring the small freedom of anonymity. She selected a measure of salt, then lingered by a display of ribbons, fingers brushing the simple luxuries she had once taken for granted. "Will that be all, good woman?" the shopkeeper asked, eyes already moving to the next customer. "Yes, by the Virgin's grace." The voice cut through the murmur of the shop like a blade. Evelyn froze, her hands stilling on the salt packet. A man stood by the doorway, his travelling cloak bearing the insignia of a distant northern barony. His eyes widened as they locked onto her face. Lady Evelyn de Montfort." The shopkeeper's attention snapped back, curiosity kindling in his gaze. The few other patrons turned, whispers already starting. "You are mistaken, sir," Evelyn managed, her voice steady even as her heart thundered against her ribs. The nobleman stepped closer, disbelief warring with certainty in his expression. "No mistake. I dined at your father's table not 3 summers past. We all thought you perished in the attack on your wedding procession." The salt slipped from her fingers, spilling white across the dirt floor. Around her, the shop seemed to contract, walls pressing closer. "Your uncle has offered rewards for news of your whereabouts," the man continued, oblivious to her distress. "The Duke of Ravenswood still awaits his bride." "I am not that woman," Evelyn said, each word sharp as broken glass. "Not any more, but the damage was done." The shopkeeper's eyes had narrowed with calculation, and the whispers had grown to murmurs. "Lady, Duke, rewards." She backed toward the door, abandoning the spilled salt like so much of her past. "My lady," the nobleman called after her, "there are men searching for you still. Your uncle's men." Evelyn fled into the market crowd, vision blurring with panic and unwanted memory. She had been naive to think she could simply vanish, that titles and obligations would not find her even here at the edge of the world. But what terrified her, more than discovery, was the thought of returning to Elias's cottage and speaking the truth she had kept buried beneath her borrowed name. The forest path seemed longer on their return, silence stretching between them like shadow. Elias had found her at the edge of the market, face pale as winter frost. She had simply mounted Thistle behind him without explanation, her hands gripping his cloak with unusual tightness. He did not press her then, recognizing the rigid set of her shoulders as one who holds words like fragile vessels, afraid they might shatter if jostled. Dusk had fallen by the time they reached the cottage. Evelyn moved mechanically, helping him stable Thistle, then standing by the hearth as he kindled the fire to life. The flames cast her face in amber light and shifting darkness, revealing the war behind her eyes. "Someone knew you," Elias said. Finally, not a question but a gentle opening of a door. She stared into the fire, hands clasped before her as if in prayer or defense. "Yes. And now you fear I must know you too." Her gaze lifted to his, surprise briefly replacing dread. "You are not like other men, Sir Elias." "I am exactly like other men," he countered softly. I simply ask fewer questions." She drew a long breath, shoulders straightening with resolve. "My name is Evelyn de Montfort, daughter of Lord Guillaume de Montfort, betrothed to the Duke of Ravenswood." The words fell between them like stones into still water. "I was travelling to my wedding when we were attacked. A wedding I did not choose." Elias nodded once, face unreadable in the firelight. I was worth a considerable fortune in lands and alliances," she continued, each word measured and precise. "To my uncle, to my betrothed, I was currency, nothing more. And now I am a ghost, a obligation unfulfilled." Her voice faltered. "I never meant to deceive you." "You didn't," he said simply. "You told me your name was Evelyn. That was truth enough." She looked at him fully then, searching his face for judgment she did not find. Most men would demand more. "I'm not most men. Not any more." He moved to add wood to the fire, his movements deliberate and unhurried. "Titles mean little here, Lady Evelyn, less than whether you can bake bread or play that lute." A small, startled laugh escaped her. "I do neither particularly well. Yet you try. That tells me more of who you are than any title." He turned to face her, firelight catching in his eyes. "You're welcome to stay or go as you choose, but know that here you are simply Evelyn. Nothing more, nothing less." She swallowed hard, something fragile and unfamiliar unfurling in her chest. Not relief, not yet. But perhaps its quiet beginning. The ancient oak stood solitary on the ridge, its gnarled branches reaching toward heaven like weathered hands in prayer. Elias had brought Evelyn here as the afternoon sun began its descent, casting long shadows across the valley below. His cottage seemed smaller from this height, a humble mark upon the vastness of forest and field. "This is where I come to remember," he said, his voice carrying on the gentle wind. 2 days had passed since her confession, each hour between them lighter somehow, as if truth had lifted a weight neither had fully acknowledged. Evelyn stood beside him, her borrowed dress simple, but no longer incongruous with her bearing. She had stopped pretending to be other than who she was, a noble woman in exile, but one who could now knead bread without flinching at the coarseness of flour beneath her nails. "Remember what?" she asked. "Everything. Nothing." He gestured toward a spot beneath the oak's broad canopy. "I buried Marguerite's ring there, after the fever took her." Evelyn's eyes softened. "Tell me about her." "She was a tanner's daughter. My father opposed the match." A small smile touched his lips. "She smelled of leather and lavender. She taught me patience I never learned on battlefields." "You loved her well," Evelyn said. Not a question, but a recognition. "I did. And when she died, I thought I'd buried that part of myself with her ring." He looked at Evelyn then, his gaze steady and clear. "I was wrong." The wind rustled through the oak's leaves, nature's quiet acknowledgement of words too meaningful for human response. Evelyn stepped closer, her shoulder nearly touching his. "I was raised to believe love was a luxury nobles couldn't afford," she said. "Marriages were alliances, nothing more. And now I find myself grateful for brigands and narrow escapes." Her fingers brushed his, tentative but deliberate. "Strange, how the worst day of my life led me here." Elias took her hand fully then, his calloused palm against her softer one. "Not so strange. Sometimes we must lose everything to find what matters." She looked up at him, eyes the color of rain-washed slate, now warmed with something new. "And what matters to you, Sir Elias of Thornvale?" "Not titles," he said, his voice low with certainty. "Not past glories or noble names. Just this, truth spoken freely, bread shared honestly, a hand that chooses to hold mine." "Then we are alike in that at least," she whispered, and as the sun touched the horizon, casting the world in gold and shadow, Something fragile and precious took root between them, like a sapling grown from soil once thought barren. They saw the rider at dawn, a solitary figure cutting across the eastern, veiled, his horse moving with purpose beneath a banner Evelyn recognized immediately. She and Elias had been gathering herbs on the ridge, the morning dew still clinging to grass and leaf, her hands stilled on the rosemary stem, fingers tightening until the fragrant needles pressed into her palm. "He bears my uncle's colours," she said, her voice tight with sudden dread. Elias straightened beside her, one hand moving instinctively to where his sword would have hung in years past. Though he no longer carried it daily, his posture shifted to that of the knight he had once been, shoulders squared, feet planted firmly on the earth. The rider approached the cottage below, then circled, examining the modest holding with obvious disdain. When he spotted them on the ridge, he spurred his mount forward, climbing the gentle slope with efficient haste. "Stay behind me," Elias murmured. "No," Evelyn replied, stepping forward instead. "I will not hide." The messenger wore the polished armor of a household guard, the crest of Montfort emblazoned on his surcoat. He dismounted with practiced grace, offering a perfunctory bow that held more obligation than respect. "Lady Evelyn de Montfort," he announced, as though conferring both blessing and sentence. "Your uncle, Lord Regent of Montfort, demands your immediate return. The Duke of Ravenswood awaits his bride." "My uncle has no authority over me," Evelyn said, her voice steadier than her heart. "I am no longer his to command." The messenger's gaze flickered to Elias, then back to her, his lip curling slightly. "You would forsake your duty for this? A fallen knight and a hovel?" "Watch your tongue," Elias warned, his voice low with the quiet menace of a man who had seen battle. The messenger's hand moved to his sword hilt. "The lady has obligations, blood debts, alliances that keep peace between realms." "She is not property," Elias said. "She has chosen her path." "Chosen?" The messenger laughed, a sharp, sound like breaking glass. "Nobles do not choose, Sir Knight. They serve, as you once knew." His eyes narrowed. "Her uncle will not accept her absence. If she does not return willingly, there are other means." Evelyn stepped forward, placing herself between the two men, her face composed into the mask of nobility she had worn her entire life before the massacre. "Tell my uncle I died on that road with the others. It would be simpler for all." "Simpler, perhaps," the messenger replied coldly, "but untrue. And he is not a man who accepts falsehood." He mounted his horse with fluid efficiency. "You have 3 days to reconsider, my lady. After that, I cannot promise your protector's safety." The messenger's threats hung in the cottage like smoke for 2 days, seeping into corners, tainting each shared meal and quiet moment. On the dawn of the 3rd day, Evelyn rose before Elias, dressed silently in Marguerite's old clothes, and took something from beneath the pallet where she slept. Elias found her kneeling beneath the ancient oak, digging into the soft earth with a small gardening trowel, her movements deliberate and unhurried. "What are you doing?" he asked, though something in him already knew. She looked up, her face serene despite the smudge of dirt across her cheek. "Burying Lady Evelyn de Montfort." In the small hole she had created lay her silver pendant, the last remnant of her noble house that she had kept hidden beneath her clothes since the day Elias found her. Beside it rested the embroidered glove, now clean of blood, but forever stained with memory. "Are you certain?" Elias asked, kneeling beside her. "Your uncle's reach is long, the Duke's longer still." "I am." She smoothed soil over the buried treasures, with steady hands. "I have been Lady Evelyn for 20 summers, bound by duty and blood. I would rather be simply Evelyn for whatever seasons remain to me, bound only by choice." Elias watched her work, understanding the weight of what she surrendered. Not merely jewels and fabric, but birthright, position, the certainty of walls and guards and titled protection. "They will come," he said quietly. Yes. She patted the earth flat, then rose, brushing soil from her hands, and we will face them together. They returned to the cottage as the day warmed around them. Inside, Evelyn took up the lute he had given her and began to play, not the courtly melodies of her past, but simpler tunes she had learned from listening to village songs on market days. As sunset painted the sky in amber and rose, they sat together on the rough-hewn bench beside the cottage door. The forest stretched before them, neither hostile nor welcoming, simply vast with possibility. "What shall we call you now?" Elias asked, "if not Lady Evelyn?" She considered this, her fingers tracing patterns on the weathered wood between them. "Just Evelyn, but perhaps—" She hesitated, then finished softly, "Evelyn of Thornvale?" He turned to her, surprise and something deeper warming his face. "That would make you my wife, in the eyes of any who asked." "Yes," she said simply, "it would." As darkness gathered around them, Evelyn leaned her head against his shoulder. Her decision settled into her bones like a long-held breath, finally. Released. Tomorrow would bring what it would. Tonight, she was exactly where she had chosen to be. They wed beneath the ancient oak at dawn, with only the bird song and morning mist as witnesses. No priest blessed their union, no nobles signed. Contracts of alliance. Elias wore his cleanest tunic, Evelyn a simple dress adorned with wildflowers gathered from the meadow's edge. Their vows were few, but weighted with the truth that only those who have lost everything truly understand. "I take you as you are," Elias said, his voice steady as he placed a ring carved from applewood upon her finger. "Not for title or land or duty, but for the courage that brought you here and the strength that made you stay. I choose you freely," Evelyn replied, her fingers closing around his. "Not as lady to knight, but as woman to man, with clear eyes and open heart." They sealed their promises with a kiss as the sun crested the distant hills, casting long golden light across the valley below. No feast followed, no minstrels played, yet the simple bread they broke together tasted sweeter than any wedding banquet. Of her former life, that evening, as stars emerged like scattered salt across the darkness, they sat together on the cottage porch, the night air cool against their skin. Thistle grazed nearby, her occasional snorts punctuating the cricket song that rose from the tall grass. "Do you think they will come?" Evelyn asked, her head resting against his shoulder. "Perhaps," Elias replied. "Men like your uncle do not surrender what they consider theirs without struggle. And if they do, then we face them together." His arm tightened around her. "I may be but one man, but I remember how to fight for what matters," she smiled, tracing the calluses on his palm with her fingertip. "And I was raised to endure sieges, though I never thought the castle would be so small." The lute rested beside them, silent for now, but ready for the music they would make in days to come. From the ridge, an owl called into the darkness, its cry echoing across the valley like a blessing. "What strange paths led us here," Evelyn mused, gazing at the stars. "From masked balls to massacre, from nobility to this quiet corner of the world." "Do you regret it?" Elias asked, his voice gentle with understanding. "Not for a moment," she answered, turning to meet his gaze. "For I have traded gilded cages for freedom, obligation for choice. What we build here may be smaller than my father's castle, but it is ours by will, not birth." As night deepened around them, they remained on the threshold between their home and the vast world beyond. Two souls who had found in each other not salvation, but something rarer still, the courage to begin again.